Well, let me tell you, last week in a Senate committee room, the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations held a confirmation hearing, and in the course of that hearing, Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine went on the attack against one of the nominees, and the assertion that was in the statement included from the Secretary of State of the United States, Marco Rubio, that our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. Senator Kaine responded to that by saying, I find that very, very troubling. I'm a devout person. I was a missionary in Honduras. We've got other devout folks in this room, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, American. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from government, but come from the Creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities, and they do it because they believe they understand what natural rights are from their Creator. Let me just stop for a minute and say, here you have a sitting senator, a United States senator, a Democrat from the state of Virginia, who in 2016 was the Democratic Party's nominee for Vice President of the United States, who is apparently completely unfamiliar with the Declaration of Independence, and at an even greater and more troubling level, seems to have no idea where human rights come from. Or, even worse, he thinks that governments and laws actually create these rights. Now, this is not a misquotation. It is not something taken out of context. This was a premeditated address from a sitting U.S. senator who made the point over and over again. In concluding this section of his remarks, Senator Kaine went on to say, quote, the notion that our rights do not come from our laws or our government should make people very, very nervous because people of any religious tradition or none are entitled to the equal protection of the laws under the 14th Amendment, end quote. Now, that is what is simply defined by its very structure as a non sequitur. That's Latin for the sequence is wrong. This thing does not follow the other thing. But nonetheless, the most troubling thing in all of this is that a sitting senator, that's right, a member of the United States Senate, denies 3 times in one statement in just a matter of moments that our rights come from the Creator. And instead, he says it's very troubling that anyone would deny that the rights come from laws and government. Now, the simple fact, let's just remind ourselves of this, is that if government can give the rights, if the rights come from laws and government, they don't pre-exist the government and the laws, then the government that gave them can take them away. And who can say that's right or wrong? Because after all, there were no rights until the government or the laws created those rights. This is in stark contrast, of course, to the very language of the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, another Virginian, when the Declaration says, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's how clear they are. They're self-evident truths. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The next line, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, notice the language here. It's also something that just comes back around in emphasis in order that we can't miss it. These rights are given to human beings because they are endowed by our Creator. These are unalienable rights, which means individual human persons cannot be separated from these rights. They are inherent. They're unalienable. And then we are told very clearly here that government exists to secure these rights, not to create these rights, but rather to secure these rights. All right. So the point here, and it was made very clear in the course of the hearing, and further that he is openly rejecting, even contradicting the founding principles of the government he serves, and the Constitution, by the way, that he has sworn to uphold. That is, by the way, a very interesting question in the history of American constitutional law. What is the relationship between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? It is an important historic argument to recognize that the Constitution and the Declaration are 2 different documents adopted by 2 different groups of men at 2 different points in early American history. But it is also true that it is impossible to have a correct understanding of the Constitution apart from the Declaration of Independence, which was the very declaration that gave birth to the nation later served by the Constitution we know as the United States Constitution, or the Constitution of the United States of America. The more basic issue here is where in the world do rights come from? If they come from ourselves, again, if we made them up, we can take them away. Government that makes them up can take them away. If these rights are simply the product of law, then someone can pass different laws. It is actually the opposite. It's not just that Senator Kaine was off the mark. It's that what he denies is what is central and essential to understanding the Declaration of Independence, the American experiment, our vision of ordered liberty, and the Constitution of the United States of America. That's all. Now, there's a lot in the background to this, and a part of it can be confused by the language. So, for instance, you have the language of natural rights. What does that mean? It means that they are held by all human beings simply by the fact that they are essential to human nature. They are revealed in nature, and thus they are natural rights. The most important part of that is that they are held by all persons naturally, and also they can be known by natural reason. Now, as we know, the most important aspect for a Christian in understanding these things isn't just natural, it's supernatural. It's our understanding of God's creation of the world, his role in world affairs, what it means for human beings to be made in his image. But the important part about natural rights is that they can't be alienated by anyone who is made as a human being and thus possesses human nature. They're also natural in the sense that they may be known. That's the assertion behind the Declaration of Independence. In fact, it's at the forefront. They're saying these rights are granted by the Creator. They are bestowed by the Creator, and they are unalienable. You can't alienate a human being from these rights. The rights are pre-political. They existed before. So you take the notion then of natural rights. What would be the alternative? Well, in the law, the alternative is between natural law and the positive law. The positive law means that human beings came up with it. And similarly, in terms of rights, you have natural rights. The alternative is positive rights. Positive means someone had to take a positive act to create them. All right, here's where things get really, really important. Not just when we're thinking about 1776 and 1789, but when we are thinking about 2025 and we're thinking about whether or not a woman supposedly has the right to destroy the unborn life within her, or whether you talk about two people who say a man has a right to marry a man. Now, by the notion of natural rights, where does marriage come from? It comes from the very structure of creation. It is inherent. Societies are accountable to it. It is pre-political. It existed before human community existed. Human community has the obligation to conform to the reality of marriage. It does not have the power to redefine marriage. But what you have now is an understanding, and just notice this pattern. When you have natural rights denied, you have artificial, positive, or plastic rights that are inserted in their place. And so right now, for instance, when you look at the American experiment, the American Declaration is that freedom of worship, freedom of religion, religious liberty is one of those unalienable rights. But when it comes to the LGBTQ revolution, you're going to have a clash between religious liberty rights and this new synthetic right of marriage declared for same-sex couples. And here's what you need to note. Increasingly, the left is honest that the natural rights have to give so that the positive rights, the plastic rights, can gain supremacy. And you see that very openly. At least one of the major distinctions right now in the worldview clash of our age comes right down to this. Which rights are pre-political? Which ones are ontological? They're real. I think it's essential to the conservative vision. It's essential to Christian understanding that we make clear that rights are real because they come from God, and he is the ultimately real. And if there is no God, then these rights are actually nothing other than positive law. They're just nothing other than plastic rights. And if government can grant them, government not only can, but will take them away when convenient. So again, the great conflict of visions, the great conflict of worldviews we face is increasingly clear, I think, especially to Christians. It's been always true, but it should be increasingly clear, is between one that is constrained by reality, one that is unconstrained, but that also means constrained by reality as understood as Christians, as being defined by our Creator and not by ourselves. And that also means that we believe that these natural rights are intrinsic to every single human being. They're pre-political. They're endowed by our Creator. It's up to government to understand them, to perceive them, to acknowledge them, and indeed, as the Declaration says, to secure them. I also just want to underline again that if you're going to create new artificial rights, they're going to crowd out the actual, real, ontologically grounded rights. And that is one of the great tragedies of our age, and confronting that, opposing that, is one of the great challenges of our age. Sometimes we are reminded of that fact by a comment that seems so outrageous you can hardly believe that it was made seriously. But the serious fact is that comment was made very seriously, repeated, 3 times asserted in the senator's statement. That tells you what we are up against. Nobody said it was going to be easy. By the way, if you'd be interested in streaming or in viewing the text of my address at NatCon 25, both are available at my website. I have the opportunity in that setting to go into greater detail.